We're back to our series that we've been doing for the month of September that I am calling The Quest for Justice and Peace. And I brazenly stole that title from a lecture that was given by Martin Luther King Jr. when he accepted the Nobel Peace Prize. That was back in 1964. I've been wanting to do a talk, or actually a talk series on that lecture for a long time now. And when I watched the neo-Nazis and the Ku Klux Klan marching in Charlottesville last month, I thought maybe that time is now. And it's really about more than just the racism that we saw on display in Charlottesville. Dr. King was addressing a larger problem, something much larger than just that. He was addressing what he calls our moral and spiritual lag. This lag is the gap or the imbalance that has developed between our spiritual and our material pursuits. We've become masters of materialism, focused on the external world, and in the process, we failed to pay sufficient attention to that all-important inner realm. And Dr. King says that the inner realm consists of spiritual things expressed in art, literature, morals, and religion. There's that word again. Religion. I know the word religion is a bit of a problem these days. Lots of people have an allergy to the word religion. And if that's a problem for you, here's what I suggest. Ignore it. Drop it. It's not a deal killer in the context of what we're talking about today. Art, literature, ethics, and philosophy contain everything that's needed to help to restore that balance between the internal and the external that Dr. King was talking about. We can study the ethical and philosophical teachings of Jesus without having to accept the theology of the Christian religion. I think that's what Dr. King did. They say that Martin Luther King led the civil rights movement with the United States Constitution in one hand and a Bible in the other. Dr. King wanted to get back to the basics of what Jesus was teaching, especially in the Sermon on the Mount, where Jesus was advancing this all-important idea of a shift in human consciousness. The Sermon on the Mount is about human consciousness that's grounded in the qualities of humility, empathy, nonviolence, compassion, generosity, all of those spiritual qualities that it's going to take in order to deal with the problems that humankind are facing. And Dr. King identifies three major problems that are at the root of most of what we consider to be human suffering. And those things are racial injustice, which we talked about last week, poverty, and war. So today we look at poverty. Poverty was one of those things that the USA declared war on in the 60s. Remember the war on poverty? Kind of ironic when you think about it, because war itself is one of the three problems that Dr. King wanted to address. But it turns out that this war on poverty thing has been one of the most effective wars that we've waged. Humankind has made genuine progress in reducing the worst of poverty around the world, across the board. Now that doesn't mean that everyone has the same standard of living. However, if we focus on health, basic income, nutrition, we've been doing well, actually very well. And I'll show you the proof in a few minutes here. We have good reason to be optimistic. We should give ourselves a pat on the back, but we don't want to be complacent either. Staying positive and staying optimistic is something that we should be grateful for, and it doesn't come easy in our culture. Talk of carnage, gloom, and doom is around us all the time, and that kind of talk is usually the sign of demagoguery. Demagoguery serving self-interest and some ideology rather than a rational appraisal of reality. let me introduce you, by way of example, to Reverend Thomas Robert Malthus, an Anglican priest and economist who wrote this book back in 1798, an essay on the principle of population, and he predicted the demise of humankind. He believed that population growth was going to skyrocket and exceed our ability to produce adequate food, which would lead to worldwide poverty, famine, and pestilence. Game over, humankind toast. The so-called Malthusian specter haunting humankind. Now, his ideas were really more of a form of demagoguery pushing a religious agenda, junk science, rather than addressing anything that was grounded in reality, as it turned out. And so now I'm going to show you a short video which is going to demonstrate how that idea of his, that Malthusian specter, has played out since the year 1800, 2 years after he wrote this book. We're going to see how that whole thing is played out here.
This shows the percent in extreme poverty in the world. 0%, 50%, and 100%. And each uprise here represents 10 years. Here we are at 1900, and this is where we are today. Now, I'm going to start all the way back 200 years ago, the time of Napoleon, 1800. What was the percentage of extreme poverty in the world then? Staggering 85%. Only a few was out of extreme poverty. And then came the Industrial Revolution. And did it improve? Not much. 1850, it was just down here to 80%. And 1900, it came down to 70%. And then further on to 1950 here. This is when I was born, just before. I was 2 years old here. 55%. And we have to go all the way to 1970 to reach 50%. The year when half the world population was out of extreme poverty and half of it was still in extreme poverty. And then, only in my adult life has it started to drop a little faster. And I stop here at 1990 when it was down to 35%. Now, this year is not the first time the United Nations put a target, a goal for extreme poverty. The former goal was to halve the extreme poverty from 1990 up to 2015, where we are now. And many people at that time said, that's mad, that will never work. So it's very exciting for you now to learn, where is the last estimate? Where is 2015? And the estimate is, I have to put a special stick here. Because it's here 2015. This is where we are now. And the estimate is 12. Let me show you this fantastic trend here. How it went down from 85%, coming slowly down, a little faster down, and then down here was the goal achieved. Well, it's not easy to measure extreme poverty. There is an uncertainty, but there is no doubt that this trend is fast going down and that the last goal was indeed achieved. However, I'm a statistician, and I know that just because you see a trend like that, that doesn't mean that it will continue in the same direction. It may level off like this, because the last lap is often the toughest. But on the other hand, you can see that it's not impossible to achieve this new goal, to end extreme poverty altogether. I'm going to show you where extreme poverty has been and how it has decreased. This is the world, and here are the population back in 1800 in each of the regions, in total 1 billion. Here is the yardstick of income. And I'm going to put down these people to show their incomes. First Europe, and they spread out here, and then Americas on top of that, then come Africa, and on top of it the most populous region, Asia, including Australia. And as I've shown you before, almost all people there were living in extreme poverty, on all regions in the world. Now, I'm going to show you what has happened. I start the world, and look, with the Industrial Revolution, the population grew here and the incomes expanded here, mainly because of increased income in Europe and America. And then in the 20th century, population continued to grow here and incomes increased even more here. And that changed the whole pattern of the world. It became a divided world. The worldview you grew up with the rich West here and with poor Africa and Asia here. But in the 1980s, the amazing growth of China and the other tiger economy in Asia and India, they start to get out of poverty. They close this gap and they are coming over on this side, and the shape of the world changed again. And look now, Africa is following. I call them the lion economies of Africa. And here we are today in a completely new shape of the world. For those of you who still think about the world as the rich and the poor, I'm going to give you a new concept. I'm going to give you a new term, the middle. What we have to do is to look at those who recently came from extreme poverty and into the middle, to learn what does it take to go from here to there.
All right. Interesting, yes?
Yes.
And that delightful man is Hans Rosling, and I've shown a couple of his videos previously here at Unity of Auburn, and I'm sorry to say that he died just this last February, so he's not going to be making any new ones, but he does have an entire website now that they put together as, I guess, his legacy to the world. And I've given you the URL, the address in the handout this morning. It's called Gapminder, and you can go there and find out all sorts of different things about poverty, wealth, health, and things in the world. He's a statistician and he does wonderful, wonderful presentations. I know that one ends rather abruptly. It's actually the trailer for a much longer documentary, and we're going to talk a little bit more about what's gone on since 2015, where that video left off. Now, I've shown one of his videos a couple of times in the past, and this other presentation that he does shows graphically like that, the same way. He shows how life expectancy and wealth have increased around the world in just 200 years. And the message here in all of this is, don't believe the doomsayers. Don't become complacent. That's easy. Don't believe the doomsayers and don't become complacent. Malthus was wrong. Okay, we just proved that Malthus was wrong, and we need to stay focused on the good things that can happen when we hold to our vision, which is a world that works for all. It's an attainable goal. The UN set a goal of cutting extreme poverty in half by 2015. We did it. And they didn't stop there. What happened in 2015 was they put out another challenge. They said that we are going to eradicate extreme poverty around the world by the year 2030. A 15-year challenge. Now, if the past is any indicator, we can do it. But first, like that song Billy was just singing, we have to believe. We have to believe that we can do it. I think it was at the end of last month I was talking about the work of Unity minister Eric Butterworth, also a well-known author, and one of the books that he wrote was called In the Flow of Life, where he talks about this unity concept that we call lack consciousness. Here it is, lack consciousness. It's a state of mind or a worldview which says there isn't enough to go around. Lack consciousness. It sees a world of limitation and scarcity, and that causes fear, which then leads to the attitude that, hey, I got to get mine first before it's all gone, because there just isn't enough to go around. Lack consciousness feeds on stories of welfare queens and people gaming the system, as if such things are rampant when in fact they are a small, minuscule percentage of the whole. But you know how it is. You know how it is, right? Everybody knows a guy who saw someone driving a Mercedes wearing solid gold neck chains with a brand new iPhone, using an EBT card to purchase prime steaks, right? Everybody knows a guy who knows a guy. Gotta slash all of the programs because of the freeloaders. And you can see what a vicious downward spiral that leads to, because it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. And the only antidote is truth, facts. Here's a dose of truth. This is from Eric Butterworth, from another book that he wrote. He said, in a time when the world is facing the grim specter of lack, as in lack consciousness, there's a great need to understand the omnipresence of divine substance. There is little question that people can fail and even go hungry in their experience of life, but the great truth of the reality of affluence is that there is a legitimate abundance for every person, which one can and must claim for oneself, and that lack of any kind in human experience is the result of some obstruction of the free flow of the creative process. That's a great way of looking at it. And one organization that's decided to embrace this creative process and take on that 15-year challenge is the Gates Foundation, as in Bill and Melinda Gates. They're betting with their own money in the foundation that in 15 years, the lives of people in poor countries will improve faster than at any time in history. Here's the bet that, oh, that's the one before that, I think I had up there. But anyway, yeah, that goes to show you Bill Gates, the computer nerd. Yeah, here it is. In 15 years, the lives of people in poor countries will improve faster than at any time in history. Now, this Gates Foundation currently has an endowment trust worth $40.3 billion, all right? As I say, not bad for a computer nerd from Seattle. And the foundation also happens to be backed by a guy named Warren Buffett, who I understand he has some money too, right?
Yeah, just a little.
In fact, Warren Buffett has vowed to spend his entire fortune on projects like this. And another interesting fact here is that they are not asking for your money. They don't need our money. And they themselves clearly aren't in it for the money either. Now, I'm sure they'll accept contributions, but they're up to something much, much bigger than that. They don't need our money. What they need is our transformed consciousness. They need our consciousness free from lack consciousness. There is enough money in the world. There is enough of an abundance of everything that's needed to end poverty and hunger once and for all. It's just not getting to where it needs to go. And that is a problem involving will. A problem involving willingness at, once again, the level of consciousness. That's where it's getting blocked. That's where that free flow is getting blocked. Takes us back to that spiritual lag or imbalance that Dr. King was talking about. Material stuff is abundant. What's in short supply is that kind of generous consciousness. For all the progress that we've made, humankind is still stuck in this tribal ideological mentality that seems to be getting worse, at least temporarily. This constant drumbeat that pits us against them, our tribe beset by enemies who must be repelled and disdained, and if there are no real enemies, hey, make some up. What really needs to change is at the level of consciousness. We need to get rid of that kind of tribal ideological mentality, and once that happens, there's no limit, and we've just demonstrated how that can work. Another short video for you. This is by Neil deGrasse Tyson, who knows a little something about science and so on. He's going to tell us about what is possible in just 15 years.
For me, the cosmic perspective is, here we are on this spot called Earth. But the cosmic perspective enables you to step back. So I have no problems with 15-year horizons. In 15 years, we went from no space program in the mid-1950s to blueprints on the moon.
Wow.
I remember the day that because that was made possible, in our minds, everything else was possible as well, on the same or shorter time scale. If we're going to bet what 15 years from now will look like, will there ever be the end of war? Perhaps. The end of hunger? Perhaps. But you have to envision it first. You have to bet on it. Then you're invested in the outcome. That's where change comes from. What does it mean to be alive as a human being with our capacity for thought when you're thinking, where's my next meal coming from? And do I have shelter over my head? Poor people, particularly in developing countries, sometimes don't have the luxury to think about the universe and our place within it. Everyone needs to share in that thought. I would say 15 years to solve world hunger and poverty. It took less time to get to the moon.
Yep. There you have it. He says it's doable, and just ponder for a moment what he was saying there. He said, a shift in perspective and all things are possible, but you have to envision it first. Bet on it, then you're invested in the outcome. That's where change comes from, and if I didn't know better, I would say he's a unity person, quoting from our friend Eric Butterworth once again, who said something very similar in another one of his books called Spiritual Economics. He calls it the law of visualization. He says, having seen and felt the end, you have willed the means to the realization of the end. That's what Neil deGrasse Tyson was saying. We create the condition in mind that makes the result inevitable. And the way we create the condition in mind is by having a clear statement of the vision that we're bringing into reality, which we do have here in the Unity movement. If anyone thinks Unity's principles aren't at work in the world doing great things, think again. And that's what gives some energy and a deeper meaning to our vision and mission. A world that works for all, and people who are not just stuck at surviving but thriving, so that they can begin to turn their attention to some of those larger wonderful things that we all get to think about, our place in the universe, and what it is that makes us flourish and thrive together. We want to keep on doing what we're doing here at Unity of Auburn. One of the things we're doing is acting very, very locally while thinking globally. We focus on regional activities and organizations to support the food closet that serves Placer County. We can do that in our corner of the world, and we continue to educate ourselves on what is needed to bring that consciousness, to bring that poverty statistic down to zero on a worldwide or global basis. I would recommend that you check out some of the resources that I've provided in the bulletin insert today, because education is so important. Hans Rosling left that legacy of his work at a site called Gapminder. That's a good one to check out. Bill Gates, he has a website called Gates Notes, where you can read about the challenge and how things are going and some of the ideas and things that they're doing out in the world to make that a reality. And then there's also an organization called the Global Citizen Institute, which tracks these kind of things. That's another wonderful resource. Everything that we need to help us to understand and then be able to hold that vision, because we can see that it is possible. We want to be educated so we can respond to the naysayers. That's really important. We want to be able to respond to the naysayers who want to convince us that this is an exercise in futility. We want to be able to discern between manipulation by fearmongers and fact, evidence-based news. That's what is ours to do in this war on poverty. Now, next week, we're going to talk about the other kind of war, the one where nations try to kill people and break things. That's the one we want to get rid of. We want to find ways to peacefully resolve our differences so we don't have to do that. So that'll be the topic next Sunday, and I hope to see you then. Thank you.